Welcome in. Thanks so much for joining me. My name is Scott, and if you're joining me for the first time, a big warm welcome. If you're joining me for the 50th time, also a big warm welcome. Thanks for continuing to support the channel and my podcast. And as those of you who listen or watch regularly know, I offer practical advice on Buddhism and meditation, and on a variety of topics, and often, in referencing those to my own personal experience as well as the wisdom of my teachers. So on that note, and to continue in that tradition of my podcasts and my channel, we're going to talk about the importance of bodhicitta today. So bodhicitta is a Sanskrit word that can be translated as the mind of awakening. Bodhi being awakening, and chitta can mean mind, or sometimes like heart, or heart-mind, right? Heart and mind aren't necessarily two different things in Buddhist cultures. So the awakened heart-mind, right? And bodhicitta is a huge topic and area. I would venture to say, when we're talking about the Mahayana Buddhist path, bodhicitta is everything, right? Because we have what's called relative bodhicitta, which covers the development of compassion, loving kindness, and altruism. And then we have absolute bodhicitta, which covers the teachings and practices on Buddha's non-duality. So really, this covers a majority of topics in Mahayana Buddhism. And its importance is not only imperative in understanding and practicing so our path can develop, but at the same time, it becomes the root of why we do what we do. So it sort of helps us to transform out of the stagnation of ego clinging into enlightened living or awakened living. So mostly I want to talk about relative bodhicitta here. I have talked about Buddha's non-duality in various, videos, content on my channel and my podcast. So you can refer to that. But mostly I wanted to spend some time on relative bodhicitta. So relative just means conceptual. It means that which we are generating as a conceptual experience, connected to our emotions, connected to, I guess we could say, our purpose, bringing meaning to why we do what we do, how we want to live our life, and what brings meaning in our actions, essentially. At first, we're developing relative bodhicitta as a strong intention for why we practice the Buddhist path in the first place, right? Because if we don't spend time working with clarifying and making ourselves more aware of our intention for meditation, it's probably going to default to the lowest common denominator, which is, I just want to feel better, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that in the beginning. It just that won't take you very far. You can feel better through meditation. It's fine. It works for that somewhat. But it has a dead end. It's not limitless. Where bodhicitta is kind of a limitless intention or motivation. I don't think of bodhicitta as a fixed point in time. I think of it as something that evolves as our path grows. It's sort of like a practice in and of itself, right? So relative means we're developing certain conceptual states. We're doing contemplative or analytical meditations. We're reflecting on bodhicitta before we actually go into our main practice of, let's say, shamatha or meditative awareness. And then meditative awareness becomes purposeful. It becomes used as a reason, it gets used as a practice towards awakening. So maybe I should define bodhicitta a little bit more here. So in relative bodhicitta, we have what's called aspirational and engaging bodhicitta. I'm mostly talking about aspirational bodhicitta here, which is just that. It's the aspirations we make to attain awakening for the benefit of all beings, right? So as I said, bodhicitta includes compassion, it includes loving kindness, but it also includes this special wish to actually become of service to others. Something that I often see gets mixed up here is people think that means it's not bodhicitta if it's not immediate. Like if we're not in service immediately, then it's not bodhicitta. Being in service of others at any capacity, at any level of help is wonderful, and we should all aspire to that and actually try to do more in our life. Bodhicitta is something a little bit broader than that because it refers to actually the wish to attain awakening to serve others through that, right? Just recognizing as we study the Dharma, as we practice over time, just recognizing that, sure, we can help others, we can do a lot of good, but we're somewhat limited until we attain enlightenment, because as long as we are under the control of our afflictive emotions, we're going to harm others sometimes. We're not going to know the right answer. We're going to be confused on the causes of suffering and the causes of happiness. An enlightened being, an awake being, is not confused on that. They are completely clear. They're completely, there's no delusion. There's no, how do you say it? There's no confusion on that. And therefore, when they guide others, they know exactly how to guide others. So they're not going to lead people towards confusion. What I just said is also something you need to chew on. That's not something I want to put out there as like you should believe that. I have conviction in that just merely from, some years of practice and study. And, it's grown the conviction enough that I see that as the best option. That, yes, on the way to enlightenment, we're not trying to be stingy. We're trying to help as much as we can, but also realizing there's a limitation and that we want to make aspirations towards that more limitless potential of how we can serve others from an awakened place, right? So that's what bodhicitta is, essentially. Aspirational. We make that aspiration before we meditate. We make it at the beginning of our session. And actually, we can practice it all day long. I'm here in Kathmandu, Nepal, and I had the fortune to go sit with one of my main teachers. His body, essentially, they've preserved his body, and you can go into his room. His name is Lama Zopa Rinpoche. You can go into his room at Kopan Monastery and sit in the presence of his preserved body, or what we call in Tibetan kudum, and he attained, we believe, awakening at the time of death, if not before. And he had a very special kind of death where you remain in meditation. The heartbeat stops, the breath stops, but the skin is still, how do you say it, like kind of like pliable, and the heart is still warm. And this is a type of meditation that great Himalayan Buddhist masters, great Vajrayana masters can do based on their bodhicitta and based on their level of practice, having attained mastery. And we call that tukdam, this experience of tukdam, their final meditation. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche was able to stay in tukdam, I think it was 3 days, something. And then because he was such a bodhisattva, or a being who had realized bodhicitta, and just a wonderful teacher to so many people across the planet. That's my guess why they decided to preserve his body, so people can always go there and practice and make offerings in the Buddhist tradition. And he's there. So anyways, I was there meditating in his room and with others, and I just couldn't stop remembering my introduction to bodhicitta, which was more or less through him, and how he valued it highly. Over all Dharma teachings, he would always prize aspirational bodhicitta and recommend it and teach different ways to do it. He has wonderful books on how to make everything bodhicitta. So he would often go to a restaurant and, make aspirational prayers with the plates and the forks. Anybody who touches this, may they, become awakened as soon as possible. Those kinds of aspirational prayers. And also when he's doing his life, like when he's putting on his robes, he was a monk, putting on his robes, he would think about bodhicitta. When he's going to bed, he would think about bodhicitta. All the time, just making the life about generating the aspiration of bodhicitta. And so, knowing him and receiving teachings from him, this made a strong imprint on me on the importance of it. And so I like to share on it. That's one of the reasons I'm sharing on it here. It's actually because of him and how precious it is. And it's not for me, it hasn't been a quick thing to gain conviction in. It's something I want to practice. By the way, I'm very far from actually embodying bodhicitta, but I'm just talking about the practice here. It took some time for me to feel conviction in it, to feel, okay, this is something quite unique that I want to put time into. But over some years, I was able to realize this is really the center of our practice. And we really want to engage in the Dharma or the Buddhist path. We need to make bodhicitta the center. If it's not the center, often what can happen is we're reinforcing our practice with techniques that are going to embolden the ego possibly and lead more to suffering. Maybe not suffering in the way we normally think of it, but basically we're not going to be able to liberate into that fuller freedom. And this isn't something I can sort of convince you about. It's just something you have to engage with and study and practice and start to gain some kind of conviction that the intention is actually the most important part of the practice, because it's like the rudder of a ship that when we turn it a certain way, it's going to go in that direction. And if we're not aware of that, it's just probably going to go in the direction of reifying more patterns of dissatisfaction, pain, and suffering. In Buddhism, we believe that when we reify the self, when we make all of the things we're gathering and doing about how can I get more happiness, this actually creates more pain, unfortunately, and sort of like paradoxically, right? And this is not an easy thing to see, and even more difficult to turn that ship around, right? But once we see it, we actually want to engage in aspirational bodhicitta, because aspirational bodhicitta and the many practices of how we engage it is a way to start to turn that ship from, being more preoccupied about, what about me, me, to other, right? And then more particularly, not just to other, but towards awakening for the benefit of others. So all of our practice gets moved in that direction. That's the why, right? Of course, we're a sentient being too, so we're included in that. But I think you understand what I'm saying. It goes beyond the ego's idea of its own borders and how to reify that and how to sort of hoard things for ourselves. So as you can see, this is a huge topic. So there's many practices for developing bodhicitta. Often one of the things we do before we practice a meditation session is to chant a simple, I guess you could say aspirational chant or prayer, where we take refuge and we generate bodhicitta, right? And so when we do that, we're training the mind. We're conditioning the mind towards a refuge, which is another topic, and bodhicitta, aspirational bodhicitta. Now, engaging bodhicitta, there's many ways to talk about this, but engaging bodhicitta is when we're not just aspiring to something, we are becoming something. And we usually engage in bodhicitta through what's called the 6 paramitas, right? The paramita of generosity, discipline, joyous perseverance. What do we have? Patience, meditation, and wisdom, right? And so these 6 paramitas form the basis for not only practice, but they're a little bit more when the aspirational bodhicitta has taken fruition and we have some taste of Buddhist non-duality. And then the 6 paramitas come to life and our actions, our life actually becomes service. So engaging means we're engaging in the service of a bodhisattva. But of course, on the path, nothing wrong, if we're still a beginner and we haven't actualized aspirational bodhicitta yet, it's okay. We engage in these 6 paramitas. They're also part of the path for all of us. But we also need to make sure, in my opinion, we're spending enough time on aspirational bodhicitta. This is really important. And it's one of these hidden things. One of my other teachers convinced me of this at some point, where it's sort of it doesn't seem that important until you start doing it more and more and you see how it starts to change and shape your mind in a positive way and starts to change why and how you practice meditation and sort of dharma in everyday life. And then you start to get convinced how much we can shape our mind with aspiration, right? And the truth is we're making aspirations all day long. They're just unconscious, right? And usually they're very selfish, no offense, right? In my case, they're very selfish. And so when we make aspirations consciously, not only are we moving towards things that are more universal and compassionate, etc. But actually, we also see the selfish ones, which isn't bad. We need to see them in order to uproot them, right? We've all got them. No shame, no shame. It doesn't define us as a good or bad person. It just means we're seeing more where we get stuck, where we get trapped. So when we practice aspirational bodhicitta, we see the light, we see the good, but we also see the things we need to work on, right? So this is another reason I find it really, really precious in my practice. So I think I'm going to leave it there. There's really a ton to say on bodhicitta. I just wanted to kind of give an introduction, especially into aspirational bodhicitta, and really encourage you to study it more, put it into practice through the four immeasurables. We also have different practices like Tonglen or what's called the sevenfold cause and effect instruction. There's many, and I have some courses on that, as well as some different things on my website. But it's just general Mahayana Buddhist content that you could go and find. Lots of books and texts and wonderful YouTube teachings on, I'm sure, by great lamas out there. So that's about it. I encourage you to practice it and make it the lifeblood of your Dharma practice. Really, it's quite precious. Okay, thanks so much.